All right, so let's talk a little bit about range now. And range is just all of the potential outputs of a function. Okay, so let's take a look at just some examples. That's probably the easiest way. So let's start with f of x is equal to x plus 3. So we want to know, well, what's the potential output? Let's look at the input first, right? Potentially, what can I put in? Are there any restrictions to the domain, right? Could we take the square root of a negative ever? Could we divide by 0? No, right? We don't have a square root. We don't have a denominator anywhere, so we don't have any restrictions. This is just going to be all real numbers or from negative infinity to infinity. I really want to practice using interval notation, so from negative infinity to infinity. And then let's figure out what's the range, right? And I'm just going to use this big R for the range. That works. Well, if I plug in negative infinity plus 3, right? I'm not going to write negative infinity plus 3. That's just the same exact thing as negative infinity. Okay, and then same thing with infinity plus 3, right? Infinity plus 3 is still infinity. Infinity and infinity plus 3. At that point, the 3 is basically negligible. Okay, so our range, our answer for this is just negative infinity to infinity. We don't have any restrictions. All right, let's look at another example. This time we'll call it g of x. And again, do not get scared by this notation. It's the same exact thing as f of x, okay? G of x is equal to, let's say, x squared minus 4. Okay, x squared minus 4. Again, let's start with the domain. What am I allowed to plug in? Am I taking a square root ever? Could I potentially be dividing by 0? No, right? So I can still plug in whatever I want, right? Negative infinity up to infinity. Any real number I'm allowed to plug in for x. Okay, if you plug in negative infinity squared, you get out infinity minus 4. Again, infinity minus 4. At that point, the 4 is negligible, right? If you got 1 billion, trillion, million minus 4, it's pretty much the same number. Okay, so when we take a look at range now, well, what's the lowest value we can get out of x squared? Right? If I plug in negative infinity, I'm going to get positive infinity. If I plug in positive infinity, I still get positive infinity. Well, if I plug in 0, right? If I plug in the number 0, 0 squared is just equal to 0. So 0 really is the lowest number that I could get out of x squared, right? And you can get the number 0 out, right? You would include this 0. But then we can't forget about this, right? We're subtracting 4 after. That's important. So if I plug in 0, I'm going to get out 0, and then I'm subtracting 4. So my range isn't from 0 to infinity. It's going to be from negative 4 to infinity. And I am including this negative 4 because if I plug in 0, I will get out negative 4. All right, and just one more example for range. If you remember back to the video on domain, we use this exact same example trying to solve, well, what's the domain? Okay, so when we were concerned about the domain, well, we saw the square root. We knew, well, that means that for our domain, x minus 3 has to be greater than or equal to 0. So, right, x has to be greater than or equal to 3. So for our domain, we got 3 to infinity. Okay? Well, now let's talk about range. How is this going to affect our range? Okay, so if I take a look again at this square root, why is this not circling? There we go. If I take a look at this square root, what are the possible values that I can get out of a square root? If I take the square root of 4, it's 2. If I take the square root of 1, it's 1. Square root of 0, yeah, you're allowed to take square root of 0. That's equal to 0. So again, out of a square root, my potential range is 0 to infinity. Now, some people will say, well, don't you have to do positive and negative? Well, would that be a function, right? If I said f of x was equal to square root of x, and I plugged in 4 and I could get out negative 2 or positive 2, does that make it a function? Right? No, we don't want the positive or negative square root. we only are concerned with the positive. Okay, we just want the positive values. So if coming out of this square root is just 0 to infinity, and then I'm adding 2, well, 0 plus 2 gives me 2. Infinity plus 2 is just infinity. So this here is my range. And what we'll take a look at next is just the graph of this exact function. Let's take a look at the graph of h of x so we can see, well, what does range look like on a coordinate plane. All right, so we're back on Desmos, and I already have the function h of x typed in. Okay, so let's take a look at this graph here. Oop, zoomed out a little bit too much. So if we zoom in, we can see, well, my first y value is right here at this point 3, 2. And I know you can't see my pointer or anything, but just look, where does the graph start? It starts at 3, 2. Well, with range, we're concerned with the y values. So 2 is the y value. From there, it's just going up and up and up. Yes, it's going up very slowly. If I zoomed out, does it look like it's ever going to reach infinity? Maybe not, right? It kind of looks like it's flat, but the square root of infinity, right? If you take the square root of a really large number, you're going to get a really large number back. So the square root of infinity actually is infinity, which is why our range is from 2 to infinity. We start at this point 3, 2. Okay, so that 2 is the lower bound of our range, and then it's going to go all the way up to positive infinity.